My parents paid for my sister's wedding in full, not partially. Not as a contribution toward a larger budget. In full, every vendor, every deposit, every last centerpiece and champagne flute and hand-addressed envelope, Easy. The final number, which my sister mentioned once without apparent awareness of what it would do to the air in the room, was $280,000. I have worked in financial planning for 8 years. I know what $280,000 is. I know what it takes to accumulate it, and what it means to spend it, and what it communicates when you spend it on a single Saturday. In June for one of your 2 daughters. When I got engaged 3 years later, April. My mother sat across from me at the kitchen table with the particular expression of a woman composing a difficult sentence. And she said that they wanted to help. They absolutely wanted to help, Yishinda. But things were different now, finances had shifted, and what they could offer was a loan. $40,000, interest-free, to be repaid over 5 years, a loan. I am a financial planner, I understand loans. I understand their structure, their function, their appropriate use. I also understand the difference between a loan and a gift. And I understand what it means when a parent offers one to one daughter and the other to the other, Abel. And I sat across from my mother at the kitchen table, and I did the subtraction in my head, and the number I arrived at was $240,000. And I kept my face very still. I said, "That's generous, thank you." I said it because I had been saying the right thing as family for 30 years, and the habit was well established. What I did not say, what I could not yet say, either, because I did not yet have the full information, was that the loan and the gift and the $240,000 gap between them had a reason. A specific documented, 30-year-old reason, written in a diary with a floral cover and a broken clasp. In handwriting I recognized the moment I saw it, tucked into the back of a filing cabinet in my parents' home office. During a visit I had made for an entirely different purpose. I found the diary on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I understood my entire life differently. Stay with me. This one took me a long time to understand, and some of what I found I didn't expect, and I want to tell it the way it actually happened, rather than the way it's easiest to tell. Subscribe if you're new, and if you have ever been handed a loan where a gift was available, this is for you. My name is Diane. I am 38 years old. I am a certified financial planner at an independent wealth management firm in Minneapolis, and I have spent my career helping people understand the structure beneath their numbers. The decisions, the histories, the inherited patterns and assumptions that produce the financial lives people find themselves living. I am good at this work. I have been told I am unusually good at finding the thing underneath the surface number, the story that the balance sheet is actually telling. I did not apply this skill to my own family for 35 years. This is not unusual. It is, in fact, one of the most common patterns in my professional experience, the person who is expert at seeing clearly in every direction except directly toward home. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. My parents have been married for 42 years. My father, spent his career in commercial insurance, a man of spreadsheets and contingency planning, and the measured accumulation of resources against future uncertainty. My mother taught piano lessons from our living room until I was in high school, and then retired from teaching to manage, as she described it, the household. What this meant in practice was that my mother managed the family, its social calendar, its relationships, its narrative, the way information moved among its members, and what shape that information took when it arrived. My sister's name is Renata. She is 5 years older than me, beautiful, in a specific old-fashioned way, dark-eyed and deliberate, and possessed of a warmth that operates on a frequency my family has always responded to more readily than they have responded to mine. I am the precise one. Renata is the warm one. These are not inaccurate descriptions. They are also, I have come to understand, assignments rather than discoveries. Labels my family settled on early, and has maintained with a consistency that made them feel like permanent facts rather than chosen framings. The wedding was in June, 5 years ago. I was a bridesmaid, in Spee. I stood in a dress, the color of dusty rose, on the lawn of an estate venue in the Wisconsin Dells, and I watched my sister marry a man named Thomas, who is gentle and steady and entirely worthy of the day that was being constructed around him. Inya. The flowers were extraordinary. The tent was lit from inside with a warm amber light that made everything look like a painting. Eaton. My parents stood at the edge of the dance floor later in the evening, and my father had his arm around my mother, and they were watching Renata dance with Thomas, and the expression on my father's face was one I had seen directed at Renata my entire life, and only occasionally, briefly, in my direction. It is not that he didn't love me. I want to be clear about that, and not for his sake but for accuracy's sake, because accuracy is what I have. He loved me. He loves me still. Run. But love expressed through a $280,000 wedding and love expressed through an interest-free loan are not the same love. Eat. And the difference lives in the body of the person receiving it in ways that are real and lasting and not dissolved by the knowledge that both are technically love. I danced at my sister's wedding. Gibi. I gave a toast that people told me was funny and warm and exactly right. 18. I drove home alone at midnight and sat in my apartment and opened my laptop and looked at my own savings account and did the math on what a wedding might cost and what I had available and felt the particular specific loneliness of a person who has just watched the thesis for someone else be set $240,000 higher than her own. Even. I did not say any of this to anyone. I am a financial planner. I put the feelings in a long-term account and I went to bed. I met my husband Will 4 years after Renata's wedding. He is a high school history teacher and a person of such fundamental decency that I sometimes look at him across a room and feel something I can only describe as structural relief. The sensation of a building that has finally found its proper foundation. He proposed in our apartment on a Sunday morning, over coffee, without ceremony and with complete sincerity, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. When I called my mother, she cried. Good tears. The real ones. She asked about Will's family and the ring and our timeline, and for 20 minutes it was uncomplicated and warm, and I allowed myself to be in it without the analytical layer I usually maintain. Then she said, Yibing. We want to help with the wedding, of course. I said. That's wonderful, she said. We've been thinking about it, and things are a little different now than they were for Renata's wedding. Your father had a better year then, financially, but we want to do something. We thought a loan, interest-free, obviously, $40,000 over 5 years, even. That way you have something to work with and we're contributing. I held the phone, $40,000. As a loan, $280,000. As a gift, UT. The gap was $240,000 and 5 years of monthly repayments, and I held the phone and I said, that's generous, thank you. Because that is what I say, Because I have always said that, and it has always moved the conversation forward, without requiring me to be in it fully. I told Will that evening. He looked at me for a moment and then said, do you want to talk about what that feels like, or do you want to talk about what we're going to do with it? I love him for that sentence, Gibi. The understanding that those are different conversations and that I might need one before the other. I said, I don't know yet what it feels like. I know the number, he said. The number is a big feeling, I said, yes, Gibi. We sat with it. Then we planned a wedding on the resources we had, and we accepted the loan, because $40,000 is $40,000, even when the comparison makes it feel like less. And we got married in September in a restaurant we loved with 80 people. And food that was real and abundant, and music that went until midnight. It was a beautiful wedding. I want to say that clearly. Gibe. It was ours, and it was beautiful, and I do not wish it had been different. But the loan sat in my accounting, accruing not interest but questions. and the questions had a way of surfacing at quiet moments. At the kitchen table, in the shower, in the specific small hours of nights, when the mind goes where it goes, when the day's management is released. Why, Dauphine? I should tell you that I am not a person who asks why easily. This is a professional liability in some respects and an asset in others. I am thorough with data before I form conclusions. Which serves my clients well, and has served my own emotional avoidance even better. I can examine a financial plan from every angle and delay a conclusion for months if I am not satisfied that the full picture is available. Evie. I was not satisfied that the full picture was available. The explanation my mother had offered. Finances had shifted. My father had a better year for Renata's wedding, was plausible on its surface. People's financial situations change. A 5-year gap between weddings can contain significant variation in liquidity. As a financial planner, I could construct the argument. As the daughter who had received the loan, I found the argument insufficient, in the specific way that a number that feels wrong regardless of the supporting rationale. I began, quietly, to look. I am methodical by nature and by training. I did not do anything dramatic. I asked my parents questions in the course of ordinary conversations. About family history, about their financial trajectory, about the years when Renata and I were growing up. I paid attention to what they offered and what they withheld, to the shape of the silences as much as the content of the answers. I talked to my aunt, my father's sister Carol, who has always been the member of my family, most willing to say the thing other people have decided not to say. Carol told me, in February, 14 months after my wedding, over a lunch that had been ostensibly about her upcoming retirement, that there had been money when Renata was born that had not been there when I was born. Not a dramatic difference, she said, but a meaningful one. My father's career had been in a particularly strong period in the late 80s and early 90s, the years of Renata's early childhood, and had hit a difficult period in the mid-90s, after I arrived, from which recovery had been gradual. I said, so there was genuinely less money when I was growing up. Carol said yes, but, and then she stopped. He said, but what? She said, that's not the whole story. I don't know the whole story. Your mother knows the whole story. She said it with a specificity that told me the whole story was a particular thing, and not simply a general reference to complexity. I said, where would I find it? Carol looked at me for a moment. Then she said, Eiffel. Your mother keeps everything. She always has. She has filing cabinets in the home office, going back to before you were born. I filed that information in the account where I was keeping all of this, and I went home, Ibcha. And I waited for the right occasion. The occasion came in April. My parents were away for a long weekend. My father's college roommate's retirement party, a trip they had been planning for months. They asked if I would house sit, water the plants, collect the mail. I said yes. I am the kind of person who house sits, who waters plants, who collects mail. I am reliable in the way that the second daughter in a particular kind of family becomes reliable. Not from lack of complexity, but from the early understanding that reliability is the available currency. I arrived on a Friday evening, I watered the plants, I collected the mail, I ate dinner in their kitchen, which is a room I have known my entire life, and which contains the table at which my mother delivered the loan conversation, the same table at which all the important conversations of my childhood had taken place. After dinner, I went into the home office. I want to be honest about this. I was looking. I knew I was looking. I had a key and permission to be in the house and every right to move through it. And I was using that presence deliberately because I had a professional and personal certainty that there was information in this house that would illuminate the question I had been carrying for 14 months. I am at peace with this decision. A financial planner who discovers that a client's books have a discrepancy does not wait to be invited to look at the underlying records. The filing cabinet had 4 drawers. 3 of them contained the expected materials. tax returns, insurance documents, property records, the organized archive of a financially careful couple's administrative life. The fourth drawer was different. It was less ordered. It contained folders without labels, photographs, documents that had been placed rather than filed, the accumulation of material that mattered enough to keep and not enough to organize. At the back of the fourth drawer, behind a folder of old Christmas cards, was a diary, floral cover. Broken clasp. Handwriting I recognized, my mother's handwriting, not my mother's handwriting as I know it now, older, more settled. The handwriting of a younger woman. The handwriting of someone writing in real time, in the present tense, with urgency. I took it to the kitchen table and I sat under the light and I opened it. The diary spanned 4 years. It began the year before I was born and ended when I was 3 years old, which means it contains the record of my own arrival from the perspective of the person who was there. I am going to tell you what was in it. Not all of it. A diary is a private document, and my mother is a private person. And there are parts of what she wrote that belong entirely to her and to the interior of a life I was not present for, But the parts that are relevant to the question I had been carrying, those I am going to tell you, because they are also about me, and I have as much right to the information that concerns my own life as anyone does. My mother had not wanted a second child, not permanently. Not in the way of someone who categorically did not want children. She had wanted Renata, had planned for Renata, had received Renata with what the diary described, in its early pages, as a love she had not known was available to her. She had wanted one child, chosen deliberately, invested in completely. I arrived as a surprise. The word she used in the diary was not surprise. It was disruption. She wrote about the disruption with the honesty that private writing permits. The kind of honesty that is not performance and not management, and not the shaped version of truth that we offer each other in conversation. She was frightened, she wrote. She was not ready, Evie. She had built a specific life with a specific child, and the introduction of a second variable felt, in her language, like a renovation she had not approved. She loved me. The diary contains this too, and I believe it, because it accumulates over the 3 years of the journal, in the particular way that reluctant love accumulates, slowly, specifically, through the actual details of an actual child. She wrote about my first word, and my first steps, and a specific afternoon when I was 2 years old, and I climbed into her lap, uninvited, and fell asleep. And she wrote that she had sat there for an hour without moving, because she did not want to wake me. She loved me. She also, and this is in the diary, in her handwriting, stated plainly in the way that private truth is plain. She also felt differently about Renata. She wrote it directly, that her love for Renata had been chosen, and her love for me had been arrived at, Bettine. And that chosen love and arrived at love were different in ways she had not expected and did not know how to resolve. She wrote that she worried she would always feel the difference, that it would always be present. Underneath the surface of the parenting, that Renata would always be the daughter she had built her family around, and I would be the one who had arrived into a structure already completed. And then there was an entry, dated when I was approximately 2 years old, in the 3rd year of the diary, that answered the question I had been carrying for 14 months. My father's difficult financial period, the one Carol had referenced, had been more serious than I had known. There had been a year in which the business had genuinely struggled, and they had drawn on savings in ways that had lasting consequences. My father had been managing the recovery quietly, in the way her father managed most things, in spreadsheets, in private, with the controlled efficiency of a man who did not want to communicate fear. My mother had written about a conversation they had in that year, in which she had confronted him about the money, and he had told her the full picture. And she had written the response she had not said to him, but had written instead. I cannot help feeling that we would be in a better position if we had stopped at one. The money we would have is the money we spent on her beginning. I don't say this out loud. I can't say this out loud. But it is true, Evium, and I think it, and it is the worst thing I have ever thought, and I cannot stop thinking it. I sat at the kitchen table for a very long time, the money we spent on her beginning. Her, me, the disruption, the arrived at one, Hebe. The financial difficulty of my childhood had been, in my mother's private accounting, associated with my existence. Not caused by it, I understand, as a financial planner, that the connection was not causal, Hebrew, that businesses have difficult periods for reasons that have nothing to do with the number of children in a family. But she had made the association, in the privacy of a diary, with a broken clasp, and once an association exists in a parent's interior, it does not stay in the diary, it travels. Through the texture of the parenting, through the choices made about resources, through the loan offered where a gift was available, through the 40-year accumulation of small differences in what each daughter received and was expected to give back, it travels. I had been living in the path of that travel my entire life without knowing where it had begun. I did not replace the diary. I photographed the relevant pages. I am a financial planner, Kimberly. I document, and I replaced it in the filing cabinet, and I watered the remaining plants, and I sat in my parents' kitchen for the rest of the evening in the way you sit somewhere when the furniture is familiar, and the room has been rearranged in your understanding without changing, physically at all. I called Will. He answered on the second ring. I told him what I had found. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Are you okay?" I thought about it, I said. "I don't know yet, I know what I found," he said. "Hebe, come home when you're ready." I stayed until morning. I needed the night in that house, in the room where my mother had written things she had never said, to let the information settle into the structure of what I already knew and find its place. By morning I had a shape for it, not a resolution, not a forgiveness or a plan, but a shape, a way of holding the information that didn't require me to act immediately or feel, completely or demand anything, before I knew what I wanted. I went home. The conversation with my mother happened in June, 2 months after I found the diary, 3 weeks after I decided I was ready, on a Saturday afternoon, when my father was playing golf, and I called and asked if I could come over. I sat across from her at the kitchen table. The same table. There is something almost structural about that table, the way it appears in every significant conversation of my family's life. I told her what I had found. I was direct. I told her I had been in the filing cabinet, that I had found the diary, that I had read the relevant sections. I did not apologize for reading it, and she did not ask me to. I think she understood, in the way that people understand things they have known would eventually arrive, that this was not a conversation that required an apology at its threshold. I told her what the diary said. I told her about the disruption and the arrived at love and the entry about the money. I told her that I had carried the loan conversation for 14 months, and that I now understood what it had been built on, and that I needed her to tell me if my understanding was accurate. She was very still, between then. My mother is a person of considerable internal management. She has been managing this family's narrative for 40 years, and her stillness was not emptiness but the very full stillness of a person marshalling a great many things simultaneously. I waited. I am good at waiting. Then she said, "Where did you find it?" I said, "Back of the fourth drawer, behind the Christmas cards." She closed her eyes. When she opened them she said, "I forgot it was there," I said. It was there." She was quiet again. Then she said, "What do you want to know?" I said, "I want to know if the entry about the money is the reason the wedding was a loan." She looked at the table, then she looked at me, and she said something I had not expected. Not a deflection, not a management, not the shaped version. She said, "I think it is. I don't think I knew it was. But I think it is," she said. I have never been able to entirely separate you from that period. Not consciously. I know that's not right. I know you are not responsible for anything that happened financially when you were 2 years old, Phoebe. But you asked me to tell you if your understanding is accurate. And I am trying to tell you the truth. And the truth is that I think you're right. I sat with that for a long time. Then I said, do you know what it has cost? Not financially. What it has actually cost, she said, tell me. So I told her. All of it. The wedding calculation, the subtraction I had done in my head on the day of the loan conversation, mutiny. The number $240,000 that lived in me like an unanswered question. The dress my sister's wedding had the budget for, and mine didn't. The way the loan had to be repaid, while the gift had simply been given. The 30 years of smaller versions of the same accounting, the resources directed toward Renata as default, and toward me as afterthought, the reliable daughter called upon and not always credited, the financial planner who could see every structure except the one she had been living inside. My mother listened. She did not interrupt. She did not cry until near the end, and when she did cry, it was the specific cry of a person confronting something in themselves they would prefer not to be confronted with. Not grief exactly, but the harder thing, the recognition of a damage they had produced, without intending and cannot now undo. She said, I'm sorry, Diane, I am sorry for all of it. Not, I didn't mean to. Not, I loved you equally in my way. Not any of the qualifications that would have made the apology easier for her and less valuable for me. Just, I'm sorry for all of it. I received it. Not as sufficient. It was not sufficient, and I was not going to tell her it was. But as real. As a real thing offered with real difficulty by a real woman who had written a real diary 30 years ago and lived with its contents ever since. My father. I want to tell you about my father, because he is part of this story even though he does not appear in the diary. The diary was my mother's, and its interior was hers. I talked to my father separately. In July, on the phone, on a Sunday afternoon when my mother was at her book club, and I knew he would be home alone. I told him I had found the diary. I told him what it contained, I told him about the entry regarding the financial period, and what my mother had associated with it. He was quiet for a long time. My father's silences are different from my mother's. Where she is managing, he is feeling, slowly, in the way of a man who was not taught to feel quickly. I waited, he said. Your mother had a harder time with your arrival than she let on. I knew that. I didn't address it the way I should have. I said, What do you mean? He said. I mean that I saw the difference in how she responded to you and Renata, and I told myself it would even out. I told myself she just needed time. I kept telling myself that for 30 years, and I never said anything to her about it, and I never said anything to you about it. And that was wrong. I said, he said, the loan. I said, yes, he said. That was wrong too. I should have told your mother it needed to be the same. I let it happen and I shouldn't have. I said, why didn't you? He was quiet for a moment. Then, because it was easier. Because she was the one who wanted the loan, and I went along with it, and I told myself it was about finances, and I knew it wasn't entirely about finances. He knew. He had known. And he had gone along with it. And he was telling me now, without my having asked directly. Which is the specific accounting of a man who has been carrying something and recognizes that the carrying is over. He said, what do you need from me? I said, I need you to understand what it felt like. To be the daughter the loan was for. He said, tell me. So I told him too. And he listened and he did not manage the information, and when I finished he said, I would do it differently. I can't do it differently now. But I want you to know I would. I said I know. Renata knows. I told her myself because she deserved to hear it from me, keeper. And because secrets held from the people who are adjacent to them do damage even to people who were not the intended target, Renata's response was the most immediate of anyone's. She cried within the first 3 minutes, Enan's, which is characteristic of her, and which is not a performance. She is a person of genuinely proximate emotion. The feelings arrive without delay. She said, the loan, Diane, the loan. I said, I know, she said. I want to give you the difference. I said, Renata, she said, not all of it, I know. I know that's not possible, and I know money isn't the point. But I want to do something. Tell me what you need. What I needed was not money. What I needed was this, my sister, who had received the gift while I received the loan, keeping, saying plainly that she saw the accounting and it was wrong and she was sorry for her place in it, even though her place in it was not her fault. She said all of those things. Without prompting, in the right order, with the specificity that makes an acknowledgement meaningful rather than ceremonial. I said, you didn't design the system. She said, no, but I benefited from it. I said, yes. She said, I'm sorry. I said, I know. We repaid the loan, all $40,000, over the 5-year term on schedule. The last payment was in March of this year. Will and I sat at our own kitchen table that evening, and I showed him the cleared balance, and he said, how do you feel? I said, I feel like I want a different word for what we just finished paying off. He said, what word? I thought about it. I said, I don't know, something that's not loan. Something that accounts for what it actually was. He said, what was it actually? I said, evidence. The whole thing was evidence, Hindi. And now it's paid, and it's still evidence, and I don't know what to do with evidence when the case is closed, he said. You keep it in the file where it belongs, and you don't let it be the active document anymore, Ibi. I keep it in the file. My mother and I have rebuilt something in the year since the diary conversation. It is not the same thing that existed before. It cannot be, routine, because what existed before was built on a foundation that included a buried document, and you cannot unbury a document and then pretend the foundation is unchanged. People. What we have now is something built with more of the actual materials. More honesty, more directness, more willingness on both our parts to say the thing rather than manage it. She calls more than she used to, Yuquin. The calls are different, less shaped, less curated. She asks about my work with genuine curiosity, and she has stopped editing herself in the way she used to. The management of what she offered and what she withheld. She said, in February, that she had been rereading parts of the diary, that she had spent a year sitting with what was in it, that she had done some work. She named a therapist, which surprised me, Ibu. My mother is not a person who has historically believed the therapy as a destination for her own processing, and that the work had been harder than she expected and more necessary. She said, I found the entry about the money. I said, I know, she said. I sat with it for a long time. I said, what did you find? She said, that I was wrong, and that I knew I was wrong, and that I wrote it down instead of saying it because writing it down felt safer, and that I kept the diary instead of burning it, be me, which means some part of me wanted it to be found eventually. I said, why? She said, because I think I always knew the accounting was off, and I think I knew you would be the one to find it, Ian. You were always the one who found the things that were off. I am the financial planner. I find the discrepancy. I read the underlying records. I tell the client what the numbers are actually saying. I said, the accounting was off. She said, yes, I said. It's in the corrected record now. She said, yes. I practice financial planning every day with clients who are making decisions about money that are not actually about money. Spending patterns that are about belonging. Saving patterns that are about fear, inheritance decisions that carry decades of family feeling without the feeling being named. I sit across from people and I help them read the structure beneath the numbers, Geekin. And I find that the structure almost always has a human story underneath it. A choice made years ago by someone whose reasoning made sense to them in a moment that no longer exists, and which has been compounding, silently ever since. My mother made a private association in a diary 30 years ago. She wrote it down and locked it in a filing cabinet, and it compounded silently across 3 decades into a lone conversation, at a kitchen table, and a 5-year repayment schedule, and a gap of $240,000 between 2 daughters. Gipta. That is the power of an unexamined assumption. That is what happens when the internal accounting is never audited, when the underlying entry is never surfaced. When the association that was as wrong from the beginning is allowed to compound through every subsequent decision. I surface it now. Here, for anyone who is running a ledger with a missing entry, Gibalun. Anyone who has received the loan when someone else received the gift and has been offered explanations that are plausible on the surface and insufficient underneath. The anyone who has sat at the kitchen table and done the subtraction in their head and kept their face very still, the entry is there. It is somewhere. In a diary or a conversation or the specific quality of a silence from someone who knows more than they have offered. The entry exists and it is not about you. It was written before you could write, before you could speak, in the interior of a person who made an association that was wrong and carried it forward without examining it, confined the entry. Not to punish the person who wrote it, Hisna. To understand the arithmetic you have been living inside, because the arithmetic has been wrong from the beginning, and you deserve to know the actual numbers. Will and I are taking a trip in September. Not a honeymoon, we are 5 years past our wedding. But something we have been calling a delayed celebration. A trip to Portugal that we booked with money we saved ourselves in the account we built ourselves. On the foundation we constructed. Without a $280,000 gift, and without the $240,000 difference. It is not the same trip. I know that. The comparison is always available, and I could spend the Portugal trip running the comparison if I chose to. I have chosen otherwise. I have chosen to be in the trip I am actually on, in the light of a country I have never seen, with the persons I chose and who chose me, in a life I have built from my own resources, with the precision and the patience of a financial planner who has learned, professionally and personally, that the foundation is the whole story. The foundation is sound. I checked it myself. Stisper, if this found you, share it with some Satan who is running the subtraction in their head and keeping their face still. Leave a comment. I read everyone. And if you have ever sat at a kitchen table and heard the word loan when you knew the word gift existed, you were not miscounting. You were reading the actual books, and the books were always telling the truth.